games. One thing that's not floating in the air, the certainty, the confidence, the excitement at the head coach position at the University of Oregon. Dan Lanning has signed a new deal at the University of Oregon. A new 6-year contract averaging around $11 million per season. He's getting about a $2 million pay bump per season. And it's a top 5 salary nationally in the sport of college football. The buyout, $20 million for Dan Lanning. It could be $30 million. It could be $40 million, $50. It could be $100 million because Oregon and Dan Lanning continue to show the ultimate investment in each other right now. I think it really started from Dan's point of view when the grass was damn green in Eugene. Oregon, I will stay here as long as you'll have me, right? That 1-minute viral clip when his name was getting floated around for the Alabama job after Nick Saban retired. That was him putting his feet into the wet concrete and saying, I'm here to stay. I'm here to build something. I'm here to build and bring a championship team to the University of Oregon. That was his investment. I think that was his commitment. Because when you've looked at Oregon in the past, there has been a little bit of this stepping stone mantra. Of course, Chip Kelly going up to the National Football League, Mario Cristobal going to Miami, Willie Taggart going to Florida State. Like Duck fans, you already know the story. You already know the story. And I think Dan Lanning putting his feet, like I said, into the wet concrete and letting that concrete dry around him so he stays at the University of Oregon. That was his commitment. And I think this new contract was Rob Mullens, the athletic director, the athletic administration at Oregon saying, we believe that you are one of the best coaches in all of college football. We believe in everything that you are doing, and this is rightfully deserved. You are one of the best coaches in college football, and I just so happen to agree with the athletic administration at Oregon by having that sentiment, by throwing this contract out at Dan Lanning, and of course, both parties signing up on the dotted line as well. Oregon knows exactly how good they have it right now. Oregon knows exactly the gem that Dan Lanning is right now. And the investment that was made with Dan, not even entertaining the Alabama stuff, not even entertaining when like the big money Texas A&M job, right, might have come and open, not even entertaining that stuff. Oregon, Dan Lanning has said many times he has shown appreciation for the University of Oregon taking a chance on him. And now the University of Oregon is returning this favor with this huge contract saying, this is us returning the favor of the investment that you have made in Duck football and the success and the rungs up the ladder that you have taken football up here in Oregon out on the West Coast. I do not foresee Dan Lanning leaving for another college head coaching job. Dan Lanning has everything he needs to be successful, to win championships at Oregon. He has all of the resources. He has all the facilities. He has all the financial backing. He has everything he needs in Eugene. There are few other places, I think, right now that would be a truly better situation than the Oregon Ducks right now for Dan Lanning. They have really aligned themselves to building a championship level culture and building a championship level team. The only thing that's missing is the 1 in the column instead of the 0 right now. And I think Dan Lanning is going to get them there. And I think Dan Lanning is ultra motivated to get them to that point. Dan Lanning is a very loyal guy. And I think he is going to be loyal to Oregon to get them that first, maybe second, maybe who knows how many national championships he's going to be able to bring to Oregon when all is said and done. Now, he said in the past, he says, hey, yeah, I've had a goal of coaching in the National Football League before, but right now my feet are planted at Oregon. I think eventually It could be 5 years down the road. It could be 10 years. It could be 15 years down the road. Dan Lanning is young enough right now at 38 years old that he could coach for another 10 years at Oregon, and then he could pursue a career in the National Football League. I think eventually that itch is going to be scratched for Dan Lanning. I don't know when it's going to happen. A lot of people, I think, have said, hey, Dan Lanning, maybe reminiscent of another Dan in the NFL, with Dan Campbell, of course, the head coach of the Detroit Lions. His aggressiveness and really his mentality and his attitude, I think, are pretty similar to what Dan Campbell is doing with the Detroit Lions, certainly right now. Now, when you look at his salary, being a top 5 salary in the sport of college football, is he a top 5 head coach in college football? I kind of took a minute to kind of think of the coaches in the Big Ten, think of the coaches in the SEC, the ACC, and some of these bigger conferences and bigger programs out there. And I kind of started going down the list, and I started checking off names, and I kind of approached it this way. Would I rather have that coach, or would I rather have Dan Lanning in charge of my football program right now? When I looked at it from the Big Ten level, I think outside of Ryan Day, I think he's the top head coach right now in the Big Ten. Outside of Ryan Day, I don't think there's any coach that I would rather have leading my program right now than Dan Lanning. I think James Franklin could possibly be in the mix, but right now, I love the young tenacity, the recruiting. We'll get to the relationship building here in just a minute, which is a huge skill for Dan, but I might have nobody other than Ryan Day I'd rather have leading my program right now than Dan Lanning. And there might be some school of thought out there that says, hey, maybe Dan Lanning might be number 1 on that list in the Big Ten. When you go to the SEC, outside of like the Kirby Smarts, Steve Sarkisians, like, I look at some of the rest of those head coaches in the SEC. I look at the Lane Kiffins, the Brian Kellys, the Josh Heupels, the Mike Elkos. Give me Dan Lanning over all those guys. Give me Dan Lanning, Shane Beamers. Give me Dan Lanning above every single one of those guys right now. So he is a top 5 head coach paid in the sport. I mentioned Kirby Smart, Steve Sarkisian, the new Ryan Day contract. Dabo Swinney is also in there as well. I think Dan Lanning is really approaching that level. What he's been able to do Oregon, he already had a really good situation when he became the head coach at Oregon. But I don't think there's any doubt when it comes to an on-the-field perspective, a development perspective. Oregon just sent a record number of Ducks to the NFL Scouting Combine. Recruiting perspective, top 5 class. They're on pace for their 3rd consecutive top 5 class at the University of Oregon. I think when you bring it all together, I think Dan Lanning truly is. If you don't want to say he's top 5, okay, maybe I'll give that to you. Certainly a guy like a Brian Kelly has a better resume than Dan right now. I think there's no question Dan Lanning is a top 10 coach in the sport. I'd feel pretty confident calling him like a top 7 head coach in the sport of college football. If he can continue to build upon that success, that's going to really cement him as one of the very best head coaches in college football right now. What makes Dan Lanning so great? All right, you got this guy. He's won a bunch of football games. They've taken steps up, bringing in better talent to Oregon, elite-level talent to Oregon right now. But why is this happening? What is Dan Lanning's best skill set? I'm not breaking any news by saying this right now. Other people on bigger platforms have said this. But one thing that I've heard from a lot of Oregon people, this thing that I've heard from some national people as well, nobody, I repeat, nobody builds better relationships than Dan Lanning. No head coach is more involved talking to families, talking to recruits, even transfers. Like, you look at Dan Lanning's transfer portal success. I think the only guy that's come onto campus for a transfer visit at Oregon, and there's lesser high-profile transfers that I'm missing here. Please leave them in the comments below if I am. But really the only significant transfer that has stepped on campus for a visit at Oregon and hasn't committed has been Walter Nolan, defensive tackle who went to Ole Miss. I think that was last year's cycle. Like, that should say something of the immediate impact, the immediate relationship that he can develop with somebody. And then it's his ability. I think this is also an underrated ability of Dan Lanning. the ability for him to have this Rolodex that he's formed throughout his coaching career, really rising up from the complete bottom now to pretty darn close to the complete top right now. But having this Rolodex of people that he's met along the way, people that have really impressed him. He's been really good at finding these younger coaches and really getting the most out of them. Like you throw out a guy like Kenny Dillingham. Really good success at Arizona State as a head coach so far. Now, he was offensive coordinator at other spots along the road, but of course his 1 year as the offensive coordinator at Oregon translated into that job to become the head coach at Arizona State. And now look what he's doing over there. But then you look, I mean, that's just a 1 year example, right? That's almost like a transfer portal example when it comes to the coaching ranks. But you look at guys that are maybe more of a recruits in the coaching ranks. Brian Michalowski was an analyst. He got upgraded to the inside linebackers coach last year. You have Bryce Better and Devin Jackson really take a big step up and have some big development over there. How about Alik Terry on the offensive line? What they're doing back-to-back Joe Moore Award winners. Mike Cavanaugh, a big part of that, certainly. But then when you look at what Alik is doing on the recruiting trail as well, that really tells you kind of these diamonds in the rough that he can be able to get. You go out, they just hired a guy, Ross Douglas, the wide receivers coach and passing game coordinator. That's really young that I think could be really good in here as well. Like his staffs that he's been able to build, surrounding himself with really good, like-minded people, is something that maybe goes a little bit overlooked when it comes to Dan Lanning. No question, Dan is one of the top head coaches in the sport. Lanning and Oregon, folks, they're here to stay.